This infamous line, written by Jean-Paul Sartre, comes from his 1944 existential play, No Exit. The line is spoken by the character Garcin at the end of the play. Garcin, trapped in a room with two women, finds himself in a version of hell that is unlike the fiery pits we often imagine. Instead, the room itself is mundane, a closed room, a simple space. Yet for Garcin, it becomes unbearable. But why? Why does he declare that hell is not the room or its confines, but the people within it? What is it about these interactions that drives him to such a conclusion? The room, symbolic of hell, seems like a laboratory for existentialists like Sartre, who used it to explore different themes regarding the nature of humanity, which we'll be discussing in this video. It's human nature to behave differently when you're alone versus when you're in the presence of others. Sartre referred to this phenomenon as the look, or what we might call the gaze of others. In No Exit, the room became a version of hell not because of its physical confines, but because these three characters were imprisoned together for eternity, forced to face one another's unrelenting judgment. They had all committed horrible acts in their lives, and now, stuck together, they were mirrors of condemnation for one another. Garcin, the only man in the room, was charmed by Estelle, while Inez, another woman in the room, was attracted to Estelle as well. This dynamic created a constant interplay of judgment and desire. Garcin and Estelle embodied the look through their desperate need to impress each other and seek validation. Garcin, for example, had left the army, claiming it was due to his pacifist views. At least that's what he told himself. But the world saw him differently. They called him a coward, a man who fled to escape the fear of killing. He was executed by a firing squad, and this label of cowardice haunted him even in death. Garcin was tortured by the idea of being seen as a coward, and desperately sought to ensure that Estelle and Inez didn't think the same of him. He even proclaimed, "A man is what he wills himself to be," attempting to define himself through his own ideals, not through the judgment of others. Estelle, on the other hand, was shallow and craved male attention. She latched onto Garcin, offering her love with little thought or depth. Inez, watching this unfold, laughed bitterly, fully aware that Estelle's behavior stemmed from her relentless need for validation from men. Inez herself acted differently when Estelle was present, trying to seduce her and vying for her attention. The dynamics in this room isn't very different than the world we live in today. The gaze of others can completely alter who we are, or at least how we behave. Imagine sitting in a cafe, enjoying a tall burger, when suddenly you notice someone staring at you. Would you continue eating the same way, or would their gaze change your behavior? This is the power of the look. It objectifies us and takes away our freedom. Sartre painted a bleak picture of human relationships, showing how the constant pressure of being seen by others becomes a burden. This gaze doesn't just observe, it transforms us, turning us from active, autonomous beings into objects of judgment. For instance, in the cafe, as soon as you realize someone is watching you, their gaze holds power over you. It changes you from someone enjoying a meal without care into someone hyper-aware of what others might think. Are they judging my eating habits, my manners, the way I'm devouring this burger? Sartre explained that the look isn't just about being watched. It's about realizing that someone else has the power to define you on their terms. If it were a dog watching you eat, it wouldn't matter. A dog's gaze doesn't carry the weight of judgment. But the stranger's gaze? That's transformative. In that moment, their judgment, whether real or imagined, defines how you see yourself. This shift in behavior captures Sartre's idea of the look. The other person's gaze forces you to reflect on yourself, altering your actions and undermining your autonomy. It reminds you that your identity isn't solely your own. It's shaped by the perceptions of others. And this idea leads us to the next chapter of the video: bad faith. At one point in the play, Garcin, overwhelmed by frustration, lashes out at both Estelle and Inez. They refuse to validate his claim that he is not a coward, a validation he desperately craves. In his anger, he begins furiously ringing the bell for the valet, pounding on it with all his might. Garcin even declares that he would willingly endure any physical punishment, any form of traditional hell, rather than endure this torment of being judged. When the door to the room finally opens, offering him a chance to leave, Garcin hesitates. Just as he is about to step out, a thought rooted in bad faith paralyzes him. What does it matter if I leave? Will they still think of me as a coward? Unable to let go of their perception of him, he turns back. He cannot bear the responsibility of his own actions and the judgment that follows. Here, Sartre illustrates a beautiful concept. Existence precedes essence. Man is not defined by any predetermined essence, but becomes what he makes of himself through his actions and choices. Suffering, Sartre argues, can either shape a person into someone resilient and wise or distort them into someone consumed by frustration and self-doubt. Those who take full responsibility for their actions and accept the consequences can live more content and authentic lives. On the other hand, individuals like Garcin, who avoid accountability and seek constant validation from others, trap themselves in an endless cycle of torment. In contrast to Garcin, Inez represents acceptance. She owns her past and her actions without illusions or excuses. She embraces her reality, focusing on the present rather than the past. Her words capture this perfectly. You're your life and nothing else. Estelle, however, remains trapped in her own insecurities. Desperate to see her reflection, she finds no mirror in the room and turns instead to Inez, asking her to describe how she looks. Inez, assuming Estelle is judging her for her own past actions, cruelly tells Estelle she has a pimple on her chin, though there is none, just to make her feel miserable. This petty cruelty reflects the destructive lengths people will go to in order to assert power or prove a point, even in trivial matters. A simple room with 3 people, yet their interactions transform it into a living hell. Their need for validation, their manipulations, and their refusal to confront themselves mirror the dynamics of the real world. Today, people are similarly desperate to prove their worth, their points, or their superiority, often at the cost of their own peace of mind. Bad faith, as Sartre explains, arises when individuals refuse to confront the freedom and responsibility that define their existence. Instead, they hide behind roles, excuses, or the judgments of others to escape the weight of their own choices. This theme ties directly to Sartre's larger exploration of relationships in being and nothingness. His statement, "Hell is other people," doesn't mean that others are inherently torturous, but rather that our bad faith often makes them so. We allow others to define us, becoming mirrors through which we see ourselves. In doing so, we sacrifice our authenticity and freedom. Sartre shows that relationships rooted in bad faith are doomed to conflict because they are built on deception of oneself and others. However, he offers a way out, a radical conversion from bad faith to authenticity. This shift requires individuals to embrace their freedom and responsibility rather than blaming others or external circumstances for their situation. Authenticity liberates us from the endless cycle of seeking approval or justification, enabling relationships to be built on honesty rather than pretense. As Inez so aptly says, "You're your life and nothing else." This acceptance of self is what separates her from Garcin, who remains trapped in his torment, unable to escape his self-imposed hell, lived a hypocrite life. The only thing worse than a liar is a liar that's also a hypocrite. The first thing that comes to mind when reading No Exit is the glaring hypocrisy of Garcin and Estelle. The moment they were confined to the room together, their initial instinct was to hide their true selves from one another. Instead of confronting their actions honestly, they immediately began weaving narratives to mask their guilt and shame. Garcin, for example, deserted his post during the war, betraying his comrades who relied on him. To make matters worse, he openly humiliated his wife by bringing his mistress's home right in front of her. Despite his egregious actions, he desperately clings to the idea that he is a man of principle and courage. Throughout the play, he tries to convince the others, and himself, that he was executed for his pacifist beliefs. Yet, the truth paints a very different picture. He was caught attempting to flee to Mexico after abandoning his comrades. This desperate need for validation reveals his hypocrisy. He proclaims moral virtue, but cannot face the reality of his cowardice. Instead of taking responsibility, he obsesses over how others perceive him, particularly fearing that they view him as a coward. Estelle's hypocrisy is just as striking. She pretends to be a pure and sophisticated woman, crafting an image of innocence and refinement. However, her past actions expose her duplicity. She had an affair with a younger man, which resulted in the birth of an illegitimate child. To cover up her infidelity, she drowned the child, an act so horrific that it led her lover to take his own life. Despite this, Estelle clings to her facade, using her charm and beauty to manipulate others. She hides behind her superficial elegance, refusing to acknowledge the depth of her moral failings. These characters' hypocrisy is what makes the room such a tormenting version of hell. They each judge and manipulate one another while simultaneously hiding their own flaws. The result is a microcosm of human relationships riddled with pretense, deceit, and the desperate need for validation. This theme of hypocrisy is as relevant today as it was in Sartre's time. In a world where everyone is so eager to control how they are perceived, people often sacrifice authenticity for the sake of maintaining a false image. Garcin and Estelle's behavior mirrors the reality of modern life, where individuals often prioritize external validation over genuine accountability. While arguing with each other and growing frustrated, Garcin finally said, "I think I could stay 2,000 years with only my thoughts for company." He said this in a moment of frustration, particularly with Inez, who refused to accept that Garcin wasn't a coward who had fled from a war. Garcin even decided he would leave the room to escape their judgment, but in the end, he returned, driven by the need to prove his point. His point was simple. You need people. They have the power to either make or break you. Just like the hell that Garcin and the others were experiencing, their reality could have been a heaven if they had simply respected each other. Yet, Garcin and Estelle would likely never experience such a heaven because their own actions trapped them in a cycle of mutual disdain. On the other hand, isolation can easily lead to a spiral of nihilistic thoughts. The weight of loneliness can amplify the meaninglessness of existence, leading one to feel utterly disconnected from the world. Alone with only one's thoughts, it's as if we're trapped in a void of endless introspection, where the mind grows dark, contemplating the futility of life. Without human connection, we might lose sight of any sense of hope or purpose. However, the presence of other people has the power to pull us out of this abyss. It's through human connection that life becomes vibrant, meaningful, and full of potential. A simple conversation, the feeling of being understood, or the support of another person can bring light to our darkest thoughts. Other people challenge our limited perspectives, broaden our minds, and show us new ways of experiencing the world. When we form relationships, we open ourselves up to love, joy, and shared experiences that make life worth living. The bonds we create with others help us transcend our own egos, moving beyond the confines of self-centeredness to something greater, something more expansive. These relationships offer moments of solace, understanding, and even transcendence, where the ordinary can feel extraordinary simply because we share it with another person. In these connections, we find not only the opportunity to give, but also the chance to receive. the gift of love, support, and companionship. Through these interactions, the struggles of life become more bearable and the joys more profound. It is in the shared in-between of relationships that we discover the essence of what makes life worth living, where moments of peace, love, and fulfillment arise. This could be heaven for us, but to experience it, we must learn to live through it, accept the sufferings, grow over time, and embrace the journey. Otherwise, we would all be like Garcin, trapped in our own miserable perceptions, saying, "I'd never have believed it." You remember all we were told about the torture chambers, the fire and brimstone, the burning marl, old wives' tales. There's no need for red-hot pokers. Hell is other people.